The bucket hit the floor with a dull clang. For a second, no one understood what Daniel Whitmore was about to do. Then the billionaire grabbed the janitor's bucket and flung its contents forward. A wave of filthy gray mop water splashed across the woman standing in front of him. Gasps rippled across the ballroom. Margaret Whitmore stood frozen as the dirty water dripped from her hair, soaked into her dress, and spread across the marble floor beneath her feet. The smell of detergent and grime hung in the air. Daniel slowly lowered the empty bucket and laughed. "Maybe next time," he said loudly, "you'll watch where you're walking." The entire room had gone silent. And if you enjoy powerful stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe to Success Story Vault TV. Stay tuned because what happened next will shock you. Margaret was his wife. And the people watching weren't strangers. They were some of the most powerful investors and executives in the city. Standing beside Daniel was a tall blonde woman with sharp blue eyes and a confident smile. Vanessa Carter. She covered her mouth, pretending to be shocked for a moment, then burst into laughter. "Oh my God," she said between giggles. "Daniel, you didn't have to do that." Margaret didn't speak. Dirty water slid down her cheeks and onto her collar. Vanessa leaned closer to Daniel and whispered loudly enough for several guests to hear. "Well, at least now she matches the floor." A few people at nearby tables shifted uncomfortably. No one laughed this time. Margaret slowly wiped her face with the back of her hand. Her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. "Are you finished, Daniel?" Daniel shrugged. "Depends," he said with a smirk. "Are you finished embarrassing me tonight?" The tension in the room tightened like a drawn wire. This wasn't just any dinner. Daniel Whitmore had organized the event to celebrate what was supposed to be the biggest deal of his career. A billion-dollar development project with international investors. The ballroom was filled with people whose signatures could move markets. And they had just watched Daniel humiliate his own wife with a bucket of dirty mop water. Across the room, the janitor who had been cleaning the floor stood frozen, staring at the empty bucket in Daniel's hand. Margaret glanced down at the puddle forming around her shoes. For a moment, it looked like she might cry. Instead, she exhaled slowly. "I think I'll leave," she said quietly. Daniel scoffed. "Oh no," he replied. "You're not walking out now. You already made enough of a scene." Vanessa crossed her arms and tilted her head as she studied Margaret. "You know," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm, "if I were you, I'd stay home next time. Events like this require a certain presentation." Margaret turned her eyes toward her. "And what presentation would that be?" Vanessa smirked. "One that doesn't break chairs." Several guests lowered their eyes. Margaret said nothing. She simply turned and began walking toward the exit. Daniel's voice followed her. "See," he called to the table. "This is what I deal with." Vanessa shook her head dramatically. "I honestly don't know how you've survived the marriage this long." Daniel laughed. But before he could say anything else, his phone began to ring. He glanced at the screen with irritation. His corporate lawyer. Daniel sighed and answered it. "What?" he said impatiently. At first his expression stayed relaxed. Then something in the lawyer's voice made his eyebrows pull together. "What do you mean the transfer is complete?" Several guests exchanged curious looks. Daniel stood up straighter. "No, that's impossible," he said sharply. "You told me we had the majority secured." The lawyer kept talking. Daniel's face slowly lost its color. "What do you mean someone bought the remaining shares?" His voice rose. "Who?" Across the room, Margaret had reached the doors. She paused. Behind her, Daniel listened to the phone for several seconds without speaking. Then he said quietly. "You'd better not be joking." The lawyer wasn't joking. Daniel lowered the phone slowly. The room had fallen so quiet that the sound of Margaret's dripping clothes hitting the marble floor echoed through the hall. Vanessa frowned. "Daniel?" she asked. Daniel looked toward the exit. Toward Margaret. His voice sounded different now. Almost confused. "Margaret," he called out. She didn't turn around. Daniel swallowed. "What did you do?" Margaret slowly faced the room again. Her hair was still wet with dirty water. But her expression was calm. "If you want to know what happens next," the narrator's voice would say, "stay with the story until the end. And if you enjoy stories where arrogance meets its consequences, don't forget to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next one." Daniel stepped forward. What did you do? He repeated. Margaret met his eyes across the room. I didn't do anything tonight, she said quietly. Daniel shook his head. My lawyer just told me someone bought controlling shares of my company. Margaret's voice remained calm. Yes. Daniel stared at her. Tell me you didn't. I did. The words landed like a stone in water. The ripples spread instantly through the crowd. Vanessa blinked. What is she talking about? She asked Daniel. Daniel didn't answer. His eyes were locked on Margaret. You bought my company, he said slowly. Margaret took a few steps back toward the table. I bought the majority shares that were still available, she corrected. Daniel laughed once. A sharp, disbelieving sound. That's impossible. Is it? You don't have that kind of money. Margaret looked down briefly, then back up. Are you sure about that? Daniel felt something cold slide down his spine. Around the room, investors were whispering to one another. The janitor slowly picked up the empty bucket and stepped away. Daniel's voice dropped. Explain, he said. Margaret folded her hands in front of her. Maybe it's time someone explained a few things. And the room leaned closer to hear what she would say next. Daniel's laughter had vanished. His chest heaved as though he'd just run a marathon. The hall, once buzzing with murmurs of small talk and clinking glasses, now held a tense, expectant silence. All eyes were on Margaret, dripping from the filthy mop water, standing with a quiet dignity that no one had anticipated. Even Vanessa's smug confidence faltered for a moment. You, Daniel started, his voice faltering. You bought my company. Margaret exhaled, a long, calm breath that carried more weight than any words could. Yes. I did. And I made sure it was done quietly. You never noticed because you were too busy humiliating me to see the truth around you. Vanessa's mouth opened, then closed. She exchanged a glance with some of the investors nearby. A few of them had already realized the significance of what Margaret just said. Their whispered conversations were audible now. She controls the majority stake. Daniel's no longer in charge. Daniel stumbled back a step, trying to compose himself. His mind raced. How could this happen? How could she? Margaret's gaze never wavered. Do you remember the early days, Daniel? When the company was on the brink of collapse? I risked everything to keep it afloat. My family's money kept us alive when your decisions almost ruined everything. Daniel shook his head in disbelief. I thought it was just loans. It wasn't, Margaret interrupted softly but firmly. It was me. I never wanted recognition, not then, and not now. I only wanted to ensure our family's legacy, and yes, I wanted to see the truth about the man I married. Tonight, the truth became very clear. The room was watching. Investors leaned forward. Vanessa's usual charm and smirk had evaporated. Daniel's side chick, who had moments ago been enjoying herself, now looked uneasy. She whispered something to Daniel, probably advice to salvage his pride, but it was too late. Daniel's hands trembled. This can't happen. I'm the CEO. Margaret shook her head. Not anymore. He tried to laugh, a hollow sound that came out more like a strangled gasp. You can't just. You did, she said, the words cutting sharper than any blade. You humiliated me tonight in front of everyone, and you thought it would be amusing. You brought her here, Vanessa, to mock me further, thinking everyone would laugh at me, and you would feel powerful. But you were wrong. You weren't the powerful one tonight. Daniel's face went pale as realization dawned. The investors began murmuring among themselves. Some were subtly checking their phones. News of the share transfer had already begun circulating in private financial channels. In that instant, Daniel felt the room close in on him. He wasn't just embarrassed, he was vulnerable. And everyone could see it. Vanessa's face turned slightly red. She took a step back. Her voice, previously dripping with sarcasm, was now uncertain. Daniel, how did? Daniel shook his head frantically, trying to regain control, but Margaret's calm presence held him in place. Do you understand now? She asked, looking straight at him. You've spent years thinking respect was bought with money. You've spent years thinking humiliation keeps people in line. But all it did was reveal who you really are. Tonight, everyone saw it, even you. Daniel's lips parted. He had no words. He looked around at the investors, many of whom now avoided eye contact with him. Some exchanged glances as if silently judging him. His arrogance, which had been a shield for years, had crumbled in seconds. Margaret stepped closer, her voice steady and commanding. "And for what it's worth, Daniel. I didn't just save the company once. I've been quietly protecting it for years. Tonight, I made it official. You've lost control because control requires more than wealth, it requires judgment, humility, and integrity. Traits you showed very little of tonight." The crowd remained silent, stunned by the revelation. Vanessa looked down, biting her lip. She had been part of this spectacle, enjoying every humiliating second, but now she felt the weight of reality crashing down. Daniel's knees felt weak. He wanted to shout, to argue, to strike back, but the truth was undeniable. He had underestimated Margaret. He had underestimated her intelligence, her patience, and her strategic foresight. And tonight, in front of the most powerful people in the room, he was revealed as a man consumed by arrogance and cruelty. Margaret turned and began to walk toward the exit. Each step she took was deliberate, a rhythm that echoed authority. Daniel wanted to follow, to plead, to apologize, but he was frozen, caught in the magnitude of what had just happened. Outside, the cool evening air hit him. He finally found his voice, desperate and trembling. "Margaret. Wait. Please. I didn't mean it like that." Margaret stopped but didn't turn around. Her hair was still damp from the mop water, her dress clinging uncomfortably, yet her posture was unshakable. "Daniel," she said quietly, but with steel behind her words, "you didn't just humiliate me tonight. You revealed yourself. You showed everyone exactly who you really are." Daniel stepped closer, his voice shaking. "We can fix this. I can explain. I can." She shook her head slowly. "No, Daniel. Some things aren't fixed with money. Some things are earned with respect. And respect is something you've never given me." Daniel's chest tightened. He swallowed hard. Every plan he had relied upon crumbled. Every illusion of power he had constructed over the years lay in ruins. Margaret turned and walked to the waiting car. The driver opened the door for her, and she slid inside, leaving Daniel standing on the pavement, soaked in the echo of his own failure. The investors followed her gaze, subtly shifting their allegiance. The whispers of the room had become a chorus, the woman they once thought powerless now held the reins. Daniel remained on the sidewalk, alone and humiliated. Vanessa lingered behind him for a moment, her face pale and uncertain, before quietly retreating. Margaret's words, calm and unwavering, still echoed in his mind, "Respect is something money can't buy." He realized, finally, that wealth had shielded him from accountability for years, but tonight, it offered no protection. And the only person he had ever truly depended upon was gone. The wet stains from the mop water slowly darkened on the pavement, a stark reminder of the night's events, the public shame, and the irreversible shift in power. And if you've been watching this story, imagining how it would feel to witness such a dramatic fall from grace, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and leave a comment sharing what you would do if you were Margaret. This is the kind of story that reminds us that arrogance and cruelty are always exposed eventually. The night was over. The crowd had dispersed. But Daniel's reputation, once untouchable, had been permanently altered by a single, shocking act in the woman he had underestimated all these years. Daniel stood there, drenched in the weight of his own arrogance, staring after Margaret's car as it disappeared into the night. The streetlights reflected off the puddles left by the dirty mop water, and each ripple seemed to mock him silently. Vanessa hovered behind him, unsure, her earlier confidence gone, replaced by something that looked suspiciously like fear. "Daniel," she began, her voice soft now, maybe you went too far this time." He shook his head, unable to speak. His mind raced, replaying the humiliation, the laughter, the whispers, the mop water cascading over his wife's shoulders. All of it magnified by the presence of investors who had seen everything. Every insult he had thrown, every cruel joke, every arrogant smirk, it had all come back to him in full force. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to steady himself. I can fix this," he muttered to no one in particular. He stepped outside the restaurant, inhaling the cool night air, and tried to catch up with the car. "Margaret. Wait. Please." Inside the car, Margaret kept her eyes forward, her hands folded neatly on her lap. She didn't turn. She didn't say a word. But the silence itself spoke volumes. Daniel's footsteps echoed on the pavement as he approached, his mind scrambling for any way to regain control, to salvage even a fraction of his pride. Please. I didn't mean it like that, he pleaded, voice cracking. I was wrong. I didn't. You didn't mean it. Margaret finally spoke, calm but precise. Daniel, you humiliated me in front of everyone tonight. Not because of an accident, not because of poor timing, but because you wanted to feel powerful. And the truth is, power isn't what you think it is. Daniel swallowed hard. I can make this right. I'll step down from the deal, I'll apologize publicly, Margaret's hand raised slightly, a gentle stop gesture. It's not that simple. You see, Daniel, respect is earned. Humiliation doesn't teach lessons, it exposes character. And tonight, you've shown everyone exactly who you are. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. His arrogance, which had carried him through years of success, was stripped away by a single phone call and the quiet strength of the woman he had always underestimated. Margaret's gaze was steady. I invested in this company because I believed in it, and in you, once. But belief cannot survive cruelty. I've kept it alive, kept it growing, even while being mocked and belittled. Now, the company is mine. And so are the decisions you thought you controlled. Daniel felt his knees weaken, as though the ground itself was betraying him. Vanessa stepped closer, almost in fear, almost seeking comfort from the man who had seemed so untouchable just an hour ago. But the illusion was gone. The investors, some still lingering in the shadows outside, had begun whispering among themselves, their respect shifting toward Margaret, whose calm composure contrasted sharply with Daniel's unraveling. He took a step forward. Margaret, please. I can. She shook her head. No, Daniel. There's nothing left to negotiate. Tonight was not about money, or business, or even humiliation. It was about seeing the truth. And the truth is that power without integrity, arrogance without accountability, and cruelty without consequence, ends like this. For the first time in his life, Daniel felt the full weight of vulnerability. The billionaire who had commanded entire floors of glass towers, controlled multi-million-dollar deals, and inspired fear with a single glance now stood alone, stripped of authority, exposed, humiliated, not by rivals, not by the media, but by the woman he had married and despised. Margaret turned her eyes back to the streetlights, her posture unwavering, her dignity intact. She climbed into the car, the engine starting quietly, and the vehicle pulled away, leaving Daniel frozen. He stood there, soaked, both literally and metaphorically, the mop water a stark reminder of the night's events. Vanessa murmured, almost to herself, I didn't know it would go like this. Daniel shook his head, trying to comprehend it all. Every insult he had ever thrown, every time he had mocked Margaret in private, in public, and in the quiet corners of their home, it all came crashing down in a single, irrevocable moment. He had underestimated patience, intelligence, and strategy. He had mistaken compliance for weakness, silence for submission. As the car disappeared from view, Daniel whispered to himself, a rare admission of defeat, I lost everything. And indeed, in the eyes of everyone who had witnessed the evening, he had. Investors who once trembled at his decisions now reconsidered their alliances. His mistress, Vanessa, no longer seemed glamorous, merely complicit. And Margaret, standing strong even after the filthy water and the cruel jokes, emerged as the true force in the room, the one commanding respect, attention, and power. If you're watching this story, take a moment to think about it. Arrogance, cruelty, and underestimating those around you can bring down even the mightiest. And sometimes, the people you treat worst are the ones who hold the keys to your future. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment sharing what you would do if you were in Margaret's shoes. This story is a reminder, respect is earned, not bought, and humility is more powerful than money. Daniel remained standing, alone, as the city night embraced him. The puddle of mop water at his feet reflected the chandeliers and the empty street, a lasting image of the fall of a man who thought he controlled everything, but controlled nothing. Margaret's words echoed one final time in his mind, respect is something money can't buy. The lesson was clear. Wealth could not shield arrogance. Power could not conceal cruelty. And the person he had humiliated the most had, in the end, become the most powerful person of all.